Joe, thanks ever so much for joining me tonight. Um, you moved over to the UK in about 82, 81.
That's right, yeah.
So between 81 and joining Gary very early 83, what were you doing yourself?
Well, when I got here, I pretty much immediately broke into the music scene, and I was gigging pretty consistently. Um, some of the first things that I got were I was playing with a guy called Ian Carr, who had a band called Nucleus, and
Right.
it was a jazz rock kind of thing, you know. And he was quite a big guy in the UK, so that was a pretty good gig. And then off the back of that, I ended up getting a gig with Mike Giles, who was the original drummer for King Crimson.
Really?
And the thing was with Ian's gig, we were touring around, and I did a record with him, which was a live BBC broadcast thing that they turned into a record. And then when I got the gig with Mike Giles, it was my first experience with like a famous rock star where they were just rich and really didn't need to do anything. So
Right.
it was kind of his playground for a while, but you know, it was a thing. I was, you know, they would pay us for rehearsals, um, and it was a very creative project. And I always was bummed out that that thing never like got any legs, you know. But
Mm.
shortly after that, while I was still with Ian's band, I got a gig with this band called Morrissey Mullen, and
Right.
Morrissey Mullen were the sort of leading jazz funk band in the UK,
Right.
and we were working like six, sometimes 7 nights a week, locally in London, and then touring around. And you know, we were doing all those gigs for door money,
Yeah.
and you know, I was making like, you know, in excess of like £600 a week in cash
Mm.
working with those guys back then. So this was a lot of work, and they were hugely popular.
Mm.
And what happened was, you know, that also snowballed into me getting sessions, you know, because I was, you know, kind of Morrissey Mullen was sort of historically a band where a lot of the musicians became sort of noted session guys.
Right.
And so that sort of catapulted me into that. And then from there as well, I started my own band called Hubbard's Cupboard,
Yeah.
and then, you know, shortly after that was kind of going for a year or so, look, I guess a couple of years, I got the call for Gary's gig.
Mm. So how did that actually come about then?
So I got the call from Gary's manager, which actually was his dad,
Mm.
Tony, and he rang me up, and he basically said, "Look, you know, we've got this album that we're working on, and you know, we heard that you taught Pino Palladino, who had played on I Assassin." And so he said, you know, we want to get this kind of style thing on our record, and we'll see you in a couple of days. And oh, yeah, don't forget your fretless bass, and hung the phone up. Well, I'd never played a fretless, you know. So the thing was, and you know, like years before that, you know, I went to the Berkeley College of Music, and and I went to Berkeley in 1975, and that's when Jaco Pastorius hit the scene, who was a world famous bass player, ended up playing with a band called Weather Report, and he was the guy who really influenced everyone with the fretless. He
Mm.
was one of Pino's major influences, as well as so many others, you know, who played fretless bass. And at the time, I never wanted to play fretless because when Jocko came out, everyone was ripping the frets out of their basses and trying to sound like him.
Right.
And I thought tactically, that's not a good deal
Mm.
because people don't want people sound alikes. They want people to go and do records and do dates and stuff. So I always shied away from that. And but that was, you know, I hung the phone up and I went, damn, you know, I got to get a fretless bass. So I went to the London Rock Shop in Camden Town,
Mm.
and the guy there was kind of a friend of mine. And I walked in and I looked on the wall and I saw a Tokai jazz bass Fender, like a Fender jazz bass copy, which was aligned fretless. And I said, "Hey, can I have that? I've got a kind of paid audition with Gary." Because the thing about that call was Tony said, "Look, let's treat this like a paid audition. So we're going to get you down. We're going to pay you your rate. But if it doesn't work out, then no one loses out." You know what I mean? Like, if it doesn't fit. So I said, fair enough. You know what I mean? So I said to the guy at the rock shop, I said, if I get this gig with Gary Numan, I'll buy it. But, can I just borrow it until, and he said, yeah, man, just take it, So I took it and I bought a new set of strings. And then when I went to the studio, it was actually like I had a gig that night and then I was going to the studio the next day. And I hadn't even had a chance to play this fretless before I got to the session. So I get to the session, and just before we're getting ready to put a track down, I was stringing the bass up with new strings. And Russell Bell, came up to me and he said, "Oh, wow, man, we heard you're like this like fretless guru. Like, how long have you been playing the fretless?" And I said, "Man, I've been playing this thing for years, man." Just blagging the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the thing was that, when I ended up putting the tracks down, I never had a problem with the intonation. And I had studied with this guy in between my years at Berkeley. I was working as a musician in Honolulu, Hawaii, and did quite a lot of stuff there. And I was studying with a guy there who was an ex-LA session guy. And he had taught me that if your positioning on the fretted bass is perfect, then if you ever play fretless, then your intonation will be flawless. And he said because you have to learn to play a fretted bass in tune before you can play a fretless. Yeah. And at the time, I kind of thought, like, what's he talking about? But I got what he meant because I never had a problem. If you listen to that album, Warriors, the intonation is spot on, and on all the fretless stuff. And I recorded that whole album in 3 hour sessions.
Really?
Yeah. 2 3 hour sessions. So yeah, it was quite interesting.
Did you have to go to Jersey to record it?
No, we recorded the whole album in Rock City.
Oh, right. Okay. It must have been some rehearsals he was doing there or something. Yeah.
Yeah, no. I never went to Jersey with Gary for anything. We did the whole album at Rock City, and it was kind of interesting, getting that because, Pino, when he studied with me, he had, in fact, Pino was my first student. It's like, what are the odds, eh? You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's kind of that's an interesting story in itself. But when Pino rang me up for lessons, I put an ad in Melody Maker magazine, and I wanted to, have a way to, supplement gig income and stuff. And I thought I can teach people, So Pino rang me, and when he came for the lesson, he said, "Yeah, I've just got this gig with Gary Numan, and it's like, a big sort of pop gig, and I want to kind of keep this level of gigs going, so I need to know what I'm doing." So I knew who Gary was, but I never listened to anything of his before I went to do that record. So I didn't know Cars. I didn't know any of these tunes. You know what I mean? I wasn't interested in that kind of music. I was interested in more jazz, jazz fusion, jazz rock, that sort of stuff.
But how did you actually find the music of Warriors, the actual tracks of them?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, the thing was that it was kind of interesting because, when I went to the first session, and the whole experience for me recording, Bill Nelson was the producer, as you know, and Bill was just an amazing guy. He's so musical and so musically minded and very creative. And so he got me straight away, and I got him. And, Gary kind of wasn't really that involved in me recording on that record. I mean, he was
Wow.
there and he liked what I was doing, you know what I mean? But um, Bill was kind of the guy who was directing things, and really me for what I was playing,
Mm,
because the thing is that, as I remember, Gary had no tunes. I mean, the stuff that was actually on tape when I went there was a Lynn drum machine loop
mm,
and some drony synth, and mostly just drony little bass synth things.
yeah, yeah.
There wasn't any tracks, there was no vocals, there were no melodies, there was no chord changes, there was very little, so it was basically me, just like, it was like a free-for-all smorgasbord
Yeah.
of, like, and then Bill sort of realizing, like, wow, this guy has a lot to give, so let's do this. And we actually, a lot of those sessions were like double and triple tracked things. There was a lot of melody things that I played, which became the melody of the tune. If you listen to, like, My Car Slides Part 2,
Yeah, yeah.
you can hear that straight away because I'm playing all those melodies. Well, there were no vocals before I played. You see what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
And I remember Gary had some ideas for tunes. To me, he was a concept guy.
Mm,
He had the concept for what he wanted, and he had lyrics. And some of the tunes, he read me the lyrics, but there was no, like, clear idea musically of what was going on. It was more like, we just want to groove here. And a lot of those drum machine grooves were kind of the way that said he kind of interpreted what he played from those, because they were all very similar to just those kind of, almost kind of, deep rock funk,
yeah.
because that's kind of where Sed was coming from too, was that area, more than people realize, actually, because he was a great drummer.
But you did know he didn't never used Bill Nelson's version, Gary.
Well, the thing is that I don't know what happened after that.
Ah, they fell out.
I heard that. I heard
Yeah.
they fell out, and this was the thing. But for me, working with Bill, that was a great experience. He was a great guy, really creative, and I got him musically, and he got me. But I do see, because they spent like another 6 months recording that record,
Mm,
and then in the with the completion of that, they then rang me and said, hey, we're doing a playback party at Rock City, and we want to invite you down. And by the way, we really like what you played, so let's get you on the tour. And that's kind of where that started. So preparation from the tour.
but then obviously you went on, because that was a big tour. Actually, it was 40 nights in the UK, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was quite intense. It was all like back-to-back gigs. I think we might have had 1 or 2 days off, and then we were just traveling, through that period. But yeah, it was pretty intense.
Because I remember Chris Payne. I done an interview with him, and he was saying during that tour, while them lot were all off partying in between gigs, you were still practicing.
Oh yeah, but I was still there partying. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's a thing, because I remember, I watched that Aid Orange interview, and he was kind of mentioning when Russell and Chris were in the band that
Mm,
Gary was always kind of saying that they never really included him in anything,
mm,
you know.
yeah.
But the way I remember that tour was we were a band, and it
Mm,
included Gary too. I mean, we hung. That was, in fact, I've said this many times of subsequent tours that I did. was that Gary included us in everything.
Mm.
So if he had a record signing, we were with him. If he was invited to some kind of do, we were with him. He always included us, and we were hanging a lot, with him. I mean, I think I probably remember him not wanting to hang as much on a
Yeah.
lot of that tour because he was busy and he was always busy with the production and it was a very involved show, as you know what
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean. So that sort of thing was going on, but yeah, I mean, but I practice like all the time, and the thing is that there's a lot of guys that say to me, well, I'm on tour, so I can't practice, but I never understood that because I used to take my bass on the bus
Mm.
and I would have my bass with me 24/7. So when I went to a hotel, I could practice. Before I
Yeah.
gig, I would always find a room. You go to any of these venues, I'd find a room and I'd practice, so
I mean, that obviously was your first major big tour,
yeah.
I would assume. I mean, personally, how was it? Truly amazing, just fantastic, or scary, or a combination of the lot?
It wasn't scary to me. I think it was pretty amazing. I mean, I kind of didn't know what to expect really, but the great thing about that band, and I feel that these days in music in general, that there is a lack of with live performance is energy.
Mm.
And what that band had was pure raw energy.
Yeah.
And I feel that I was kind of a big contributor to that, to add to that. I mean, there was a lot that went into the making of that tour, and a lot
Mm.
of stuff I learned, I mean, we rehearsed 7 weeks. That was
Yeah.
almost as long as the tour.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, like, and that was a bit, that was a bit hard for me to adjust to because, I think we did 7 weeks of rehearsal and 5 weeks were at Gary's house.
Right.
And I remember watching Roger's interview with you
Mm.
and him saying that like Gary had no furniture in that place. You know what I mean? I remember when I first went there, and it was like I was like, wow, how long have you lived here? Did you just move in? And he was like, no, I've been here for a couple of years. There was like nothing in the house. There was a wolf. There was a
Yeah.
stuffed wolf that was like going up his staircase, and it was like in the sort of when the staircase kind of turns
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there on the landing, and which he had shipped over from the Alaskan airport on, I think, the I Assassin tour.
He did. Yeah.
And I always thought that was a bit bizarre, but yeah, so we all stayed at Gary's house and lived there. And of course, at the time I was gigging, and I was also, what was interesting about getting the gig with Gary was that the band that I was in, Morrissey, Mullen, they were
Mm.
signed to Beggar's Banquet.
All right.
So Nick Austin, who was the president of Beggars, he used to come down and see me with Morrissey Mullen all the time, and he quite liked my energy and my vibe, and he knew I had my own band called Hubbard's Cupboard, which was a jazz fusion band, all
Mm.
instrumental, and he would sort of talk to me every now and again and say, yeah, it's great you've got your own band. I don't really think there's anything I can do with that. But the minute I got the gig with Gary, he contacted me and he said, look, I want to sign you now. And
Yeah.
he was starting a new label, which was a subsidiary of Beggars called Coda Records.
Right.
And it was kind of like pitched as like a new age jazz, but in the end, it was really just kind of a jazz funk label. And so at the time of rehearsing, for 5 weeks at Gary's house, in that time I was also gigging at night, and I was doing my first album for Coda Records.
Really?
And it was weird because Gary, he said to me, he said, like, if you're doing a gig, I'd love to come down and see your band.
Mm.
So we were doing a gig at this club in Sloane Square called the Main Squeeze. And so he said, yeah, I'm going to come down. So he came down to the gig, and we did me and the drummer did this kind of drum and bass improvisation slot in the gig. And at the end of the gig, Gary said, you know what, man, that was amazing what you guys did. He goes, I want that solo in the show.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, well, we kind of just improvised that, and he said, no, I want that particular thing. So as a result, we did put together a little thing where I could do my shtick in the show, where he would walk off the stage, and I play like a 3 to 5 minute bass solo. You know what I mean? It was insane.
Yeah, I think there was two. Was there about 2 tracks? No, there was definitely one. I can't remember which ones they were now myself, but
I think, yeah, if I had the set list in front of me, because there's something I found on YouTube, which was a Hammersmith Odeon, one of the Hammersmith Odeon nights.
Yeah,
which wasn't a bad recording, actually.
I think it's a BBC recording, actually.
Yeah, I think so, and that wasn't too bad, actually. The way they might have doctored the actual. It might have been a remix of the original thing, but it sounded pretty good, I thought, on YouTube.
Yeah, I know the song. It's in my head. I just can't remember now. It'll come to me later. But because I don't know, but over the years, a lot of people said that you were blowing the basses up, the amplifiers. now, did you or didn't you?
No,
I didn't think so.
No, that was. Yeah, there was some weird guy who I don't know who put this together, but there was that thing. There was a website called Outlander or something.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Did you see that thing? That was kind of a mock game show thing, a Survivor type game show with the Gary Numan thing. It was quite funny. And under my thing, it was like, because they had like interests, and hobbies or something.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
My hobby was Russian roulette. And but the guy clearly got his info wrong because it had the drink and it said Wild Turkey.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which I hate whiskey and I've never drunk it.
No.
So if you put Bacardi down there, that would have been right, because that was and it was funny because when we went on the road, at some stage, someone came up to me and said, "What do you want on the rider?" And I was like, "What's a rider?" And they said, "What do you drink?" And I said, "Well, I like a Bacardi and Coke, when I have a drink, you know what I mean?" So he said, "Okay, fine, don't worry about it," and then went off. So the first gig we do in Glasgow, I think, and we get up to the venue, and before the gig starts, we walk into the sort of room, where it's for the band,
Yeah.
We have our dressing rooms, and we're all fully dressed, and we're getting ready to go on stage. We walk into the band room, and there's a spread there, man, with like food and drink. It's miles long, man, and there's like it's a full bar, like
Yeah.
and it's all this stuff. And so I said to Russell, I said, well, can we just help ourselves? And he said, yeah, we can help ourselves. So I made myself a drink, one little drink to kick the gig off, and so when at the end of the gig, we're getting ready to leave, and Russell said, and there's like something like 6 bottles of Bacardi on this table, okay? And Russell says, "Are you going to take that Bacardi?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, it's yours." I said, "Really?" And so at one stage on that tour, I'm walking around with like 25 bottles of Bacardi in my bag. You know what I mean? It's all like jingling together, because I couldn't drink. I couldn't drink it, what I mean? It was too much. It was way too much, and but yeah, it was, so all that was kind of new to me, riding around in limousines and, Gary was very good at that. Like if we had a record signing, I remember the first one we did, he said, I'll get someone to pick you up. And at the time I lived in Clapham Common, and he said, I'll get someone to send a car around to you, you know, and then you bring you up to Oxford Street, the HMV in Oxford Street. And so I said, oh, okay, you know, so the car buzzes on the door, and he said, yeah, it's a car for Gary Numan, from Gary Numan. And I said, okay, I come down, and it's like a stretch limousine. Yeah, man. And I'm like, what? You know, so get in the thing, and that was kind of my introduction to all that. So he was good at that. You know, he made you feel good about it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Music for Chameleons, that track, actually. I'm running it bang in my head, and I seem to remember there was a drum bassy bit in that one live.
Yeah, it could have been. I can't really remember the name.
I think he done it on the next tour, so it could have been on that tour as well. But then towards, I mean, it's a weird one because it sounds like you had a really good time.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a good hang, and it was a good, you know, musically, it was incredibly tight because we did all that rehearsal, you know, and for me, like, you know, going back to those rehearsals, I, you know, I was used to playing in bands where you'd get a whole set together in a day. You know, so to have 5 weeks of rehearsal just to get the tunes together, I kind of thought, like, you know, this is a bit overkill, you know.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, but in, you know, sort of in hindsight, that band and show was insanely tight together.
Yeah.
I mean, we were so coordinated, and none of it was choreographed. So in other words, like, Gary would say, like, you know, when we were getting the image together, because, you know, he had the Wild Boys, he had the Mad Max kind of thing, which in fact I said Wild Boys, but Duran copied that for that Wild Boys video. So did the Judas Priest, man. I mean, that Judas Priest guy, that was a complete ripoff of Gary Numan Warriors. Do you remember?
No, I can't.
The Judas Priest guy with the bleach blonde hair.
No, I'll have to have a look.
You have to have a look at that because he was wearing the gauntlet and it was a complete and utter rip. So Gary had that way of influencing people, and that was a really kind of cool. It was kind of aggressive, the image, but it had energy behind it, you know, and it kind of made sense, you know, like the whole idea that he had a baseball bat in his hand, and it was all that sort of, you know, Mad Max kind of vibe.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then, you know, like the set was, you know, he had sort of said, I wanted to have this like Escape from New York type thing for, you know, the drum riser and these kind of those Checkpoint Charlie kind of towers, you know, that he had on either side. And then for me and Russell, we had, because back then I had really long hair.
Indeed,
you know, Russell had quite long hair too. And so what Gary wanted is me and Russell to be either side of him, and we had our hair dyed black, and then on either side, like I think I was on the sort of right side of Gary and Russell was on the left side of Gary. We had these like aubergine quiffs that were like sort of dyed into our hair, but I had mine on this side and he had his on this side. You know, so it's sort of coincided together. But you know, from doing the 5 weeks of rehearsal at his house, and then and that was, you know, I don't even think Gary sang a note for any of that. He just observed what was going on and directed. You know, he was directing everything. He was telling. And because I think there was some questions on that Facebook page of yours where some of the guys said, like, you know, because I was playing tunes that were on Warriors, but I was playing tunes that were on other things too.
Indeed, yeah.
And one question was, how did you get away with playing like your version of whatever We Take Mystery. What was that one? We Take.
Yeah, it was, but that was a fretless bass
Yeah,
on
but it
that one.
was, but that was on another record though.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but see, I never heard any of that stuff. I never listened to it. I never listened to anything. I didn't listen to Cars. You know,
I
I
suppose
just played it.
there's things like Remind Me to Smile, which was on that tour,
Yeah, Remind Me
which
to Smile. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, which then you've got to add. So not only have you just done the album, you're now doing some of Gary's old back catalogue as such, but putting your own twist to
yeah,
even them
and
songs.
that was never to be quite honest, that was never a thing. None of us, we didn't even talk about that.
Really?
We those guys just played. Russell would just play me the chords, or Chris, you know, and sort of explain the form, and then I would play what I played. And Gary never said a word to me. Gary never said anything to me negatively musically about that tour.
Hmm.
There was never one thing that he said, no, I don't want you to play that. You know, it was always it was just no one said anything. It was just this is what it is, you know, and that was like, I always take that when I'm working with people, is that we're on a wavelength
Yeah.
together, you know, that's the direction. And you know, Gary dug that. He dug my influence and energy. And then of course, you know, when we were recording the record, he sort of said, this was on the first session, where he said, you know, what is it that you do? You know, like, who do you play with? You know, I've never heard of you.
Mm.
And because it was Nick Smith, who was the engineer
Yeah.
at Rock City, who recommended me for that gig.
Mm.
And you know, I had been doing a lot of sessions at Rock City. I worked a lot with Nigel Wright, who was one of the keyboard players with Shack Attack.
Yeah, yeah.
I ended up doing Bill Sharp's solo album there at Rock City. I did Jim Mullen's solo album at Rock City, and Claire Hamill's stuff I recorded at Rock City. So I was doing a lot of sessions there, and Nick was the engineer
Yeah.
on all of it. So he was the one that, you know, Pino and Gary had some kind of a falling out, you know, at the end of that I Assassin tour, and you know, he got the Dramatus guys back,
Mm.
who were the original guys, right? Because he
Yeah.
didn't really dig what was going on the I Assassin thing, and so he got those guys back. But Paul Gardiner was done.
Yeah.
You know, he had a terrible addiction, and you know, he couldn't really do anything. So they needed a bass player, and Nick Smith told me that they were in a session, and Gary said, right about now is where I really need Pino to come
Yeah.
back and play, you know, put some of his magic that he had on I Assassin, because he really liked that stuff Pino did. And so Nick said, well, why didn't you get the guy who taught Pino?
Mm.
And he said, great, give him a call. And that's how that whole thing came. But when we were sitting in the studio, and he said, what is it that you do? And I said, well, you know, I play with this band Morrissey Mullen.
Mm.
And I knew he wouldn't know who they were. I said, they're kind of a jazz funk band. But I said, you know, to try to bridge the gap, you know, with him, I said, well, the sax player, Dick Morrissey, plays a lot with Vangelis.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, he played on Chariots of Fire, and he played on Blade Runner. He said,
Yeah.
he goes, you're kidding me. He goes, Blade Runner is my favorite piece of music of all time.
Mm.
And I said, wow, yeah, that's good. It's good, isn't it? You know, it's a nice soundtrack. He said, can you get him to come and play on the record? And I said, yeah. And so I got him on that to come down, and he just, you know, they just rolled the tape, and Dick just improvised, played all those solos on there. And the interesting thing about Warriors, I know a lot of the fans didn't really like that record, but to me, musically, that was the best thing Gary ever did, because it was super eclectic.
Mm.
It wasn't just a pop record. It wasn't just a kind of, you know, a synth record. It wasn't like an industrial metal record.
I know.
You couldn't, And that's why I think that a lot of the fans, you know, historically kind of looked at that as kind of a weird thing and thought, there's some jazz stuff on it. But, you know, if you watch some of those interviews with Gary where he was talking about the making of Warriors, is that he was interested in fusing these influences. He was interested in getting some jazz in there. And what he's got on that record is you know, people are actually playing, which now is kind of evaporating.
Yeah.
You know, and also there's those different influences coming in there, which kind of makes that whole thing set apart from other things to me.
Yeah, I've never been able to put it in any category. You know, it's not synth music. It's, as you've just said, when it came out, you're like, I wouldn't even know where to put it, you know, in a category.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, well, you know, the press were never really friendly to Gary, especially around that time, and for years, as we know. But you know, so they had a field day. But, you know, he had a couple of hits. His Sister's Surprise and Warriors were both hits.
Yeah.
And, you know, he got a little traction off of that. But you know, I thought that as far as longevity is concerned, you know, there's a lot, like especially the remasters that he did, I think sound really good. You know, I mean, to me, that sounds, you know, all of that, it doesn't sound dated. It doesn't sound like you're listening to some old, like, relic.
No, for sure.
You know, old
I
museum
don't
relic.
disagree.
You know, to me, it sounds fresh and, you know, full of energy. But the thing is that the fans on the tour loved it because they love him.
Yeah.
And they love the whole vibe from it, you know.
But would you, because Gary is a great one for people just disappearing without really saying why. And he's a great one for just saying we didn't get on. He did it with Dennis Haynes to start with, I think, on Telecom, and with Pino, and with yourself. And he's done it several times to other people. But would you say there was an actual, any reason, any falling out, or just none you can think of? Or
the thing is the tour, he also did that with Mick Karn as well. But the thing is that, here's the thing, you know, whenever you have projects where people are working in that close proximity, day in and day out, and that's like, if you think we rehearsed, like I was involved with the record for 2 days. And then, but those guys were involved that entire time. So that's like 6 months when they were involved with that. Then they had 7 weeks straight going from the house rehearsals to the full production at the airplane hangar in Shepperton Studios, with full set, full costumes, everything for 2 weeks. And just running that show over and over again. And then doing the tour, which was full on from beginning to end. I mean, we did a whole week. We did like a whole week at Hammersmith Odeon, sold out. You know what I'm saying? So it was like, it was just go. I think really, like I said, there might have been 2 days where we had off and we were traveling through those days or doing TV appearances or whatever. So whenever you have that, and also it's like, you know, I don't know, what, 38 years ago or something?
Yeah.
So we're all young and we're all like kind of invincible as well at that time. And all a little bit fiery, is that I think that can kind of get under people's skin, you know, and there, you know, I think, you know, near the end of the tour, I had made a decision that I wasn't going to continue to do it, you know, that I'd had enough, you know, at the end of the whole thing. And you know, we had, me and Gary butted heads a little bit, but it was really to do with, it was really to do with the crew, in the way, in the efficiency of the crew, because you talk about blowing up amps, but I mean gear on that tour. I mean, this is pre MIDI.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're talking about Chris, he had his keyboard setup was like Rick Wakeman's.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? He had
Yeah,
like
yeah.
12 or 13 keyboards on that Checkpoint Charlie
Yeah.
tower, and constantly stuff was going down.
Yeah.
And the crew guys, really, it was kind of a weird scenario with them, because I thought that those guys were kind of lax,
Mm.
and you couldn't criticize them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and anyone who said anything, and there was some stuff with some of my gear where it just wasn't properly serviced for a tour like that, because when you go out on a tour, you have techs, and there was a big crew, man.
Yeah, yeah.
And because it's very involved. You have techs and stuff. And so, there was a couple of there was a thing at the Dominion Theater gigs where some of my stuff wasn't working,
Mm.
and we couldn't play, so that caused a little bit of friction. But the thing was that I guess the real icing of the cake that probably made Gary a little bit annoyed with me was on that tour. There was a guy who I met, and for some weird reason, I felt like, if I'm going to be successful, I need a manager of my own.
Yeah.
I came up with the bright idea that, I need some kind of a manager. And this guy was like, I think he was like a bin liner salesman. He came from like a rich family.
Yeah.
Nice guy. He was a friend of mine as well. Became a friend of mine. And he sort of wrangled me into, doing this management sort of thing with me. And after the tour was over, when I was gone from Gary's band, I wasn't going back. I mean, I'd had enough, and there was no real, it kind of just seemed like the right thing. I never said to them that I wasn't coming back, but I wasn't. And they didn't tell me that they had any new projects. So, there was a break that was needed, to have.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this manager, when I was sort of saying to him, like, hey, look, you see, what was one of the drags about when that tour ended was, very sadly, Paul Gardiner died.
Yeah.
And the headline was Gary Numan's bass player found dead in Hyde Park.
Mm.
You see? So I was showing up at gigs trying to reacclimate myself to the session scene and the gigging scene in London.
Yeah.
And people were running into me and going, man, I'm sure I saw a headline that said you were dead.
Oh my God.
You
Yeah.
see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I got a lot of press. And I got a lot of attention on that tour. That was when, I started to get endorsement deals from companies. And
Yeah, yeah.
so people really knew I was the bass player with Gary's band.
Yeah.
So I had said to this manager, look, what are you actually doing for me? Because I need you to get out there and do some stuff for me. So he goes to Melody Maker magazine and gives them a story that was, I storm out of the Gary Numan gig because of rows with Tony.
Oh, right. Okay.
That I claim that I wrote all the tracks on Warriors and all this stuff. And the thing was that he got this, it was sensationalized for me saying like something to you, like what I said to you is like, when I played on My Car Slides, that melody was mine. I remember hearing the record and thought, yeah, quite a few of these little hooks I came up with. I've not got no songwriting credit for it, but at the time I thought, I don't care. I'm on this record. I got paid well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do the tour. And I never, moaned about that or did anything along those lines, But you see, when you are hanging out with people and you're telling people stories like that, and then they're trying to get a press story on you.
Yeah.
This is how they kind of twist and turn things so it becomes sensationalized and they can sell a story. So when I read that, it's kind of like, hey, this isn't really what I wanted you to put in. And the other thing is, like, I don't want the reputation of working for an artist, and then what I do at the end of the tour is trash them in the media.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
But the problem was that, and I did try to contact, I think I actually spoke to Beryl about this, and kind of explained my side of the story, because I had got rid of that guy after that. But, the thing is once certain things are done, people lose faith, and, it's kind of, that was it,
But
there wouldn't have been any going back after that.
No, but you're not wrong with what you were saying. As you've gone to do the sessions of Warriors, and you're listening to certain sounds or demos or whatever, and no one's actually telling you or asking you how to play your bass to it, are they? So you've had to think of something to work with, or play something to work with the song, haven't you?
Oh yeah, and that happens frequently, but on Warriors it was a little bit more in detail. But the real issue about that is that was never an issue. I mean, I never said that as a point of contention. That was never like something that I was sitting around complaining and moaning about.
Yeah, I know.
On that sort of thing. I mean, the kind of things I would complain about is like, when we didn't have, when we couldn't get a decent restaurant to get, decent food.
Yeah.
Which, after you're tired and all that kind of stuff, loads of people are going to be doing that, but, other than that, it was just the normal kind of stuff. But it did kind of upset me, that thing, because, I didn't want, people's perception of me to be like, well, yeah, you hired Joe Hubbard, and then what he does is he trashes you to the media, the minute the gig's over, because like I said, I had enough of that, and I wanted to go back. I mean, I ended up going back to London, and I was very quickly, working with Denny Lane. Denny Lane was, he used to be in Paul McCartney's Wings.
Yeah.
I worked with Denny, did a record with him. We toured. I worked with Claire Hamill, who was the wife of Nick Austin from Beggar's Banquet.
Yeah.
And we did a whole tour supporting Rick Wakeman.
Really?
So I was serious. I was super busy, and and that was the thing. I didn't really want to continue that thing with Gary, because it was I'd done that.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It wasn't really a negative thing. And even that little like bucking heads at the Dominion Theater about the gear and stuff, that to me was more of like, well, these things happen, you know what I mean? People have disagreements. And,
oh yeah, for sure.
And that sort of thing. But for me, I have fond memories of working with him,
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
That is brilliant, actually, because it is strange how people see people who have worked with Gary, because Gary either says he can't remember or he doesn't want to remember. So people tend to see the person he's got rid of is that he's got rid of them because a reason Gary doesn't want to tell anyone. Whereas, as you've just said, and like I said, he's a great one for saying they didn't fit in, and that's it. And a lot of his fans will go with just that.
Yeah, yeah.
rather than sort of think, well, why didn't he fit in? What actually happened? And like you were then explaining about your manager, and to be fair, it's an age thing, isn't it? How old were you then? 23, 24?
Yeah, yeah, something like that, you know?
You know?
So, you know, it's like, yeah, exactly. And I was quite fiery too, and
Mm,
Gary was.
yeah.
You know, Gary was a fiery guy. You
Mm,
know, I mean, we could speak frankly. I mean, to be quite honest, when I did that, my first session I did with Warriors, I got a ride to Shepperton Studios from a drummer friend of mine because at the time I didn't have a car, and you know, we went in the studio and we must have sat around for like 2 hours
mm,
before we did anything. And so, you know, I just said to Gary, like he was fiddling around with this Lynn drum machine
mm.
loop, you know, that he was trying to program, you know. And I just sort of said after about 2 hours, like, hey, are we going to play anything today? Because I got a gig tonight.
Mm.
And Gary just looked at me as though no one speaks to me like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
he just kind of went, oh, okay, okay, yeah, yeah, let's get to it. So he kind of liked it
yeah.
because I never treated him like he was different. I
Mm,
just
mm.
treated him like he was a guy, like he
Well,
was.
as he is.
As he is, he's just
Yeah,
a guy. But you see, he was a huge star, man. People used
yeah.
to camp out, you know, on his
I know.
doorstep and stuff. You know what I mean? And you know he you know all this kind of adulation 24/7,
Mm.
you know, and he was young back then
Yeah,
too,
yeah.
you know, so you know we were both a bit fiery and stuff, but you know, to be quite honest, I think he respected me for being someone that he could hang with and trust my opinion. You know, he
Mm.
used to he used to very often say to me, you know, about what do you think of this and what do you think of that, you know, I've come up with this new idea. What do you think of it? You know, and he would always run things by me, you know, and I thought like, yeah, you know, we're kind of I with the whole thing, you know, with all those other guys as well, like Seth and Russell and
Mm.
Chris, man. You know, the thing that a lot of people don't realize was when that tour ended, they asked me to join Dramatus.
Really?
Yeah. So
Ah.
I was actually officially a member of Dramatis for quite a short time because they basically, Rocket Records that had signed them had really, you know, they wanted, because off the back of Warriors, they wanted to rekindle the whole Dramatis thing.
Yeah.
So the tour ended, and you know, and all that stuff, you know, with the thing in Melody Maker, and then the next quickest thing that I was doing was this Dramatis project,
Mm.
and I was working with Russell. With there was another songwriter where we went on a couple of songwriting sessions, and then we had this meeting with John Reed, who was Elton John's manager,
Mm.
and at the meeting, you know, it was some pub lunchy kind of thing, you know,
Yeah.
in Kew or something, and they sort of say, well, here's what we're going to do for you. What we're going to do is we're going to do a telly thing and sell it to K-Tel Records.
Right.
Okay, do you remember those things?
Yeah, yeah,
K-Tel
yeah.
Records, where you play your own arrangements of the classics,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
like some classical music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like sitting there thinking like, what are you talking about? Like we're a band, man.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is a band. What we're selling out to K-Tel Records, you know? And he
Yeah.
said, no, no, you don't get it. There's money in this, and we can do this. And I said, well, okay. Well, how much am I getting paid for this then?
Mm.
And he said, well, it doesn't work like that, man. You know, in the big leagues, you basically, what we do is we go in and we do it all, and then all the royalties come and you get paid. And I basically said right there at that meeting, I said, no, I'm not interested in that.
Mm.
You know, we if we're going to put our time and effort into, especially this, where it's not really dramatis,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
some like, you know, K-Tel plays the classics. And I saw that interview with Chris where he showed that gold or
Yeah,
bronze record or
yeah.
whatever that he had, and he said, "Yeah, we got this, but we never it never ended up getting any money for it."
That's it.
Right?
Yeah.
That was the whole thing. So I kind of, you know, walked away from that thing because of that.
Mm,
But that's what a lot of people don't realize is that I was in Dramatis.
yeah,
So
yeah. Well, I didn't know that.
the vibe of us as friends was very much there. You
Mm,
know what I mean? And we were tight. You know, we were tight. You know, as a band, it was never uh, uh, like it was those guys, and then it was me, and then Gary somewhere over
yeah,
here. It
yeah.
was like we were a band and hanging out together, and you know, it was all like, you know, pulling pranks on each other, and you know, the whole thing. You know, it was great. All those guys were very cool. You know.
So years later, after leaving your band, and everything, you was working as a bouncer or doorman, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of, there came a point sort of in the late 90s where I got out of music. I kind of became disillusioned. And somebody asked me this once, why did you do that? And I said, I loved music too much to continue.
Mm,
And, um, and so I kind of got back into my martial arts, which, you know, when I was a kid and in a young, very, you know, young early 20s, I was very into, and really got back into it like with, you know, with vigor, and was, you know, went from practicing 8 hours a day as a bass player to practicing 8 hours a day as a martial artist.
mm,
So along the way, uh, I was I ended up getting a gig doing some bouncing at some clubs, and it was kind of a weird vibe for me, but I thought, you know, it's easy money, and you know, really a good bouncer isn't a guy who ends up getting into fights.
mm.
You know, he's a guy who stops them, you know what I mean? So I thought, you know, this is kind of would be cool, and working in clubs and stuff, I've done it my whole life, so it kind of worked out, and I ended up thinking to myself, you know, when I first got into this, like, you know, I want to, if I'm going to do this, I want to end up being like, you know, the top guy. You know, I want to go as far as I can with this and work at the best places. So I ended up getting this gig at the Met Bar, which was at the Metropolitan Hotel in Hyde Park Corner.
Mm,
And this was like the sort of premier music, entertainment, you know, celebrity hangout. And
mm.
it was a very small club. I mean, with like, you know, the fire rating was like 200 people in this place, you know,
Wow.
and they used to pack in about 350 people, you know,
As you do.
and you know, it was a members only kind of vibe. And one night when I was working there, um, uh, uh, a car pulls up outside, and this woman gets out, and she comes up to me and she says, she goes, "Hey, you know, if I brought someone to the door like Gary Numan, would you
Mm,
let him in?"
mm.
And I said, "Yeah, I'd let him in." You know, and I just thought, like, I just wondered if he'd recognize me, you
Right.
know.
Okay.
And the thing is that, you know, I was a little bit bigger, you know, when I was 20, in my early 20s, I was quite skinny, you know, so I'd
Mm,
put on a
mm.
little bit of weight, and, you know, had the whole, you know, the overcoat on
Yeah,
and the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
thing, you know. My hair was a lot shorter. But true to Gary, she parks the car up, and Gary is sort of swans in with a McDonald's cup.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, you know,
yeah,
like he's
yeah,
just had a McDonald's takeaway.
yeah.
And he just walks in and he goes, "Cheers, guys." You know, and he just walks through, and he never it never sort of twigged to him that it was me. You know what I mean? I don't
Uh,
think he might have, but he didn't seem, you know, at all. And because that night he was meeting Marilyn Manson was in the club that night, so
all right.
that's who he was coming to see. And I think Courtney Love was there as well. And uh, and then at the end of the night, I had to kick them all out of the club. You know what I
Mm.
mean? but that was a club you never had any trouble at, certainly inside the club. But saying that, I would be doing lots of different gigs as well, working on the door. And I did a thing once up in, I think it was up at the Portobello Road or something. I can't remember where it was, but it was a private party at a club. And, someone's birthday party, and it was really strictly a private do, guest list only type of thing. And up rocks Russell Bell with another guy. And it was funny. Russell was suited and booted, man.
Yeah.
But he was a bit off his face, and not that bothered me, but he sort of said, hey, we want to come in, and I said, well, it's a guest list only, tonight. And he said, he goes, really? He goes, can you get the manager? And I said, no, man, it's a guest list only. And then he was kind of trying to hum and haw about it and, think about ways to get in. And I said, listen, I'll tell you what, if you can tell me my name, I'll let you in. He just looked at me and he was dumbfounded.
Yeah.
He just didn't come up with anything. And he said, no, I'm sorry, mate. He had no idea that it was me. And the fact that we were talking to each other, I thought was a bit bizarre, So I thought, well, I can't let him in if he doesn't know who I am. So I knocked him back.
Oh, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Oh, that's great. That's great.